Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my January wrap-up. Before we get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what was the best book you read in January. Let's go for the positives. We want to start the year out strong. Hopefully it went well for you. Usually I always take this time to say how I am so shocked that the month is already over. Where's the time gone? But not this time. No. Looking back at some of the books I read, it feels like it's been a lifetime since I read them. I don't know why. January just felt like it has moved very slowly. No jumping into book reviews yet. First, let's talk about the stats for the month. I read 10 books, and across those I read 3,877 pages. That includes converting audiobook hours to pages, but for the audiobooks I listened to, I listened for 47.99 hours, which, wow, that's a lot. That was between 4 audiobooks and then 2 additional books which I read in mixed formats. My average rating was 4.1 stars, so we are off to a great start to the year, and then unfortunately I did have 1 DNF. As for my genre breakdown, I read 3 fantasies this month. Following that, I read 1 graphic novel, 1 nonfiction, 4 romances, and 1 sci-fi. Since it's the beginning of the year, let's make the layout for this video easy and just go chronologically in order of how I read these books. So first is Seventh Grave and Nobody by Dorinda Jones. This was continuing my reread of the Charlie Davidson series, which I talked about in my December wrap-up. I'm gonna do the same thing I did over there, which is give you a summary of the series as a whole. This follows Charlie, who is a PI as well as the Grim Reaper, and that works really great for her because it helps in her everyday job. On top of that, there's a romance element going throughout the series, and it is just such a fun time. For this one, in terms of a mini spoiler-free review, all of these characters are my babies. Also, anything having to do with a father-daughter relationship makes me cry like a baby. I gave this one 5 stars again. Following that was my nonfiction pick for the month, and that is The 2000s Made Me Gay by Grace Perry. I also read this for the Nonfiction Baddies book club, and I'll put links to all the information for that in the description down below if you're interested in joining. This is also February's pick, so you still have some time to read it. This is a series of essays in which Grace Perry takes different pieces of media from when she was growing up in the early 2000s and discusses how they affected her identity, her relationship with her sexuality, her relationship with her gender, and everything in between. Obviously, with this book being about how media can influence an individual, unsurprisingly, I loved it. That section of communications was my absolute favorite to study when I was in college, so I had a great time with this. Across the board, it was just a really enjoyable read. It was very easy to relate to Grace, but I will say my biggest negative is that this can be alienating if you don't know the piece of media it's discussing. Perry will usually do a quick summary of whatever it is she's referring to, but I think there's some nuance to those pieces of media that just gets lost in translation. It's not the same if you haven't actually seen it or experienced it yourself. Thankfully for me, I did know majority of them. There was maybe 2 or 3 that went over my head. Basically, my point boils down to the fact that this is a pretty niche book, which is kind of ironic given that she talks about echo chambers at the very end of the book. This could kind of start to go in that direction. Even if you don't know these pieces of media, I think this would be a great point to understand the early aughts media and how it influenced individuals. Media really does have such an impact on how we perceive ourselves, those around us, and the world as a whole, but at the same time, media mimics real life. Our society has become so much more accepting of queer people and pays more attention to queer issues, which is why we can see better representation of these individuals in different TV shows and different movies and different books. I think the layout of this book does a great job of showcasing that and how Perry lays out each piece of media that she's discussing and how she moves forward in her life and the different pieces of media moving forward as well. She segues between both her life as well as the media pieces pretty well, and all in all, I had a really great time reading this. I laughed at many different points, and by the end, I could really relate to Grace Perry. I thought she was a really cool individual, and honestly, I would kind of love to pick her brain about some other pieces of media out there. I'm pretty sure in the acknowledgements, she stated that this originally was a podcast idea, and oh my lord, I would love this as a podcast. That sounds fascinating. I ended up going with 4 stars for this book. I really enjoyed it. Next, I read the 8th book in the Charlie Davidson series, 8th Grave After Dark. From this book forward, Dorinda Jones really starts to differentiate each of the books even more because the settings start to change a great deal. I really enjoy this one though because we see the entire gang working together to try and ensure Charlie's safety, but we also see just how freaking powerful she is and how little we really know about her and what the future holds. I ended up giving this one 5 stars as well. I love this one. It is such a fun time. Next up, I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and I read this as a part of my reading books that were annotated for me video, but I'm not actually going to review it here because I am holding out for a different video which is coming out here soon. In that same annotation video, however, I also read Our Violet Ends by Chloe Gong, and this was amazing. This gave me everything I wanted in an ending that I didn't even know I wanted, and I'm still impressed that Chloe Gong did that for me. The tension in this is immaculate. The constant back and forth between banter and flirting in Romeo and Juliet, oh, I was here for it. These two go back and forth between debating whether they actually love them and then wanting to stab them, and like that showcases true lovers to enemies to lovers. It's amazing. That back and forth also makes for a very emotional and dramatic ride, but I loved every second of it. The politics in this one are way more prevalent than the first. There's a lot going on between the not the Russians, between the two gangs on top of the communist, the nationalist, and then there's the worker strikes that are taking place, not to mention stuff that I can't really get into because it spoils the first one, which I just realized I should probably tell you what the first book's about. This is the second book in the These Violent Delights duology, which is a Romeo and Juliet retelling set in Shanghai among these warring gangs. Our Romeo and Juliet end up having to work together to try and solve this fantastical mystery that's taking place when a disease/monster thing starts to attack the city. The both of them are trying to ensure the city's survival. With that summary and what I was saying about the politics, that showcases that this is a pretty serious book. Since this was the second book in a Romeo and Juliet duology, understandably, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, worried about what was going to happen to our two main characters. I just have to say, I think, like I said, Chloe Gong managed to give me exactly what I wanted, which made total sense for both our main characters, but still managed to surprise me, and I don't know how she did that so well. I was constantly anxious for all of these characters who I've grown to love, and am so impressed that Gong was still developing them like 400 pages into the second book. The one drawback I would say for this is that this is the second book in a duology, and the first 150 pages do read pretty similar to the first book, so if you read them back to back, I could kind of understand that getting a little tiresome and you really wanting to push past it, but since I had about a year between the two of them, I didn't mind it too much. Ended up going with 4.5 stars on this one, same rating as the first. So freaking good. As you can tell, I annotated this one a lot, and it now has a home on my favorite series shelf. Next up is The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, and I'm also not going to be reviewing that here because it is a part of that same video for Well Met. However, one review I can give you is Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider Volume 1 Spidergeddon. This was my comic book for the month. I was so happy to be back with Gwen, but I will say this is not the place to start if you want an introduction to her story. This is set in the middle of the Spidergeddon comic arc, which also takes place in the main Spider-Man storyline. So if you don't understand what's happening in that, you're going to be completely lost here. Thankfully, I realized this pretty quickly and just hopped over onto Comic Vine, and thank God for that because it made it so much easier to follow along with what was taking place. I didn't actually realize this prior to reading it, but apparently the author for this is Shauna Maguire, who has many other book series which are pretty big on BookTube, and thus far I do have to say I like her writing for Gwen. I think she gave her more moxie than the previous author in the other Spider-Gwen series, and I really loved that. I adored the art style in this across the board, but particularly whenever Gwen would visit other worlds and her suit would change to match whatever the setting was. That was so awesome. The color palettes throughout also always paired very well with the tone of the story. Ignoring the Spider-Geddon plot, the main story of this is following Gwen as she goes to a different world and meets a new Spider-Man and a new Green Goblin, and it was a fun time. I love seeing the alternate worlds and how Marvel will change one little thing, which then in turn changes so many other things about all the characters we already know. I ended up going with 4 stars on this one. A good time. I'm excited to pick up the next. Then I read Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell as a part of a 24-hour readathon. I'll put a link to that over there. Go watch me squeal because I shockingly loved this. This is a sci-fi story following these two men who are put in an arranged marriage to try and connect the Empire and this small world. However, it ends up being so much more. This is a sci-fi story with an intricate plot, well-developed characters, and a murder mystery that literally had me suspecting every single person we were ever introduced to, except for you, Janan. I never thought it was you, baby. Oh, and how could I forget the delicate political situation that is going down because of their marriage, but also was the reason for their marriage. Honestly, though, what really had me swooning was the slow burn romance between our two main characters. I loved them so much. The character work in this is impeccable. Janan is so cold and reserved when we first meet him. However, as we start to get to know him and see it from his perspective, it is clear that he has not had the easiest life and that his past is definitely affecting his actions in this new marriage. He is constantly assessing every single situation and weighing his options about what his decision will do and how it will affect him, his marriage, and the entire fate of the Empire at the same time. It's honestly a lot. On the opposite side, we have Keem, who is a former wild child and the least favorite of the Emperor's grandchildren. He is now just trying to chill out, keep his head down, stay below the radar because he doesn't want to get sent to a convent. Again, there's so much depth between the two of them and I loved getting to know them. We alternate between both of their perspectives, which I really enjoyed because we would get to see how these different situations would be read from each of their perspectives. Basically, the entire time is just constant misunderstandings where both of them are trying to get to the same outcome, but because they don't really know one another, they're constantly misreading one another's actions and then the meaning and emotions behind them. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention that Janan's previous husband, Tam, who is actually Keem's cousin, has recently died under suspicious circumstances, and unfortunately now the both of them end up having to try and investigate it. In my 24-hour readathon, I pitched this as Red, White, and Royal Blue meets Star Wars, and I will stick by that, but I do want to say this has a lot more focus on the mystery and the political elements. For so much of this book, the both of them are trying desperately to not overstep in the other's space because they don't know each other that well, but at the same time, both of them want the other to overstep. 4.5 stars because it was an amazing ride that I really was not anticipating to enjoy because sci-fi and I don't really get along in book format very often. After that one, I read the audiobook for Truth or Beard by Penny Reed. I finally did this because of Brennan Dunaway, and Brennan, I loved it so much. I really didn't know what to expect going into this, but my god, it was hilarious. This is a enemies to lovers story between our two main characters, Jess, who has recently moved back to her small town to be a teacher, but she has wanderlust and she is only planning to stay there so she can pay off her student loans and then eventually is going to go travel the world. On the opposite side, we are following Dwayne, who Jess has grown up with and absolutely hated, but she's been in love with his twin brother Beau for most of her life. Of course, there is a misunderstanding and she comes to find out that Dwayne has actually been in love with her for many a years. The misunderstanding situation did not start this off on the best footing. It seemed a little non-consensual, kind of awkward, but thankfully I did appreciate how Penny Reed handled it. And then moving forward, I just had the best time with this book. Our couple in this had amazing chemistry, fantastic banter, not to mention the steam, the tension. Oh my god, it was impeccable. And then there's the history between the two of them. They literally grew up together, so this somehow manages to feel like second chance romance, even though it's not really second chance romance. In terms of the enemies to lovers though, I loved this so much because oftentimes the spice would kick up right around the time when they were arguing, and that's the enemies to lovers tension I want, is where it just boils over to the point of passion. That being said, I do think this kind of transitioned out of that enemies territory a little fast for me. I would have liked if we had hung out in that area a little bit longer before we transitioned into them trying to be a couple. Both our main characters had very strong personalities which shine through throughout most of the book. I really enjoyed the contrast between the southern hospitality, given that this is set in a small town in Tennessee, and then the total lack of filter and boundaries whenever the two of our main characters are with one another. Also, this is the first in the Winston Brothers series, and may I just say the Winston family had me howling. Anytime they were all together, I was loving it, and I'm so excited to continue the next book to see more of this family. As I said, this was set in a small Tennessee town, and shockingly for a romance, there was actually a good amount of atmosphere to it. Lots of southern charm, and then since I listened to the audiobook, both of the narrators putting on a twang for each of our characters made it even more immersive. I'm giving this baby 3 chili peppers. I was highly uncomfortable listening to it in audiobook format. That did not mean I did not enjoy it, my lord. Whew. Penny Reed, girl, you know what you're doing. I went with 4 stars on this one. It was a great time. Maybe not a new favorite romance. I'm not sure. I'm very intrigued to see how the rest of the series goes, and that might affect my rating for this one if I'm being honest. Finally, the 10th book I read this month was Satisfaction Guaranteed by 𝗖cie heç𝘁𝘁, and I'm also not going to review this one here. It's in a video coming out here soon, I promise. Only a few more videos and then you'll have it. I'll put a link to it right here whenever it comes out. Okay guys, that was a long time filming, but thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials linked in the description if you're interested in keeping up with what I am reading. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!